Did you know that they discovered the cure for death in the Amazon back in 1916? Are our world leaders and CEOs secretly hoarding the cure for death while the rest of us suffer? Why would they hide this from us? Well, it's true. At least according to the 2021 adventure film Jungle Cruise, starring Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and Emily Blunt, based on the popular Disney Parks amusement ride. But you wouldn't know that they had made a history-redefining discovery that changed man's relationship with mortality. Especially not based around the way they end the film. Hi, I'm Kid. I'm a filmmaker and storyteller who's been in love with movies and storytelling since I was 4 years old. If you don't believe me, I have a $120,000 piece of scratch paper that says it too. But more than that, I also have been working in Los Angeles in the film, television, and commercial spaces for the last 13 years. Working at everything from large Oscar-winning production companies to small independent companies and even TMZ for a very short period of time. We won't talk about that. Because of that, and because I love movies so much, I have a really high expectations for whatever it is that I'm seeing, more than most people I know, and it's rare that I come out of a movie without some thoughts or critiques of some kind. According to some of my friends, that makes me a dedicated hater. But I believe that I'm really just voicing my opinions and voicing my frustrations with the way that they had told these stories. And I think that by doing that, I help improve my own craft, and hopefully it will help you guys start to see that there are things that can be improved on whatever it is that you're working on. So with that in mind, I wanted to use my dedicated hater powers to talk about the things that are narratively unexplored, or the ideas and themes that the movies and shows that we watch introduce which are completely ignored or forgotten by the end of it. And for some reason, I really couldn't get Jungle Cruise out of my head. So, spoiler warnings ahead. Now, if you're one of the majority of people around the world who hasn't seen the film, you really didn't miss a whole lot. The film is about a young, no-nonsense doctor who enlists a riverboat captain on the Amazon to look for a tree with the power to heal and change the future of medicine forever. It's a really cool idea, but something that they really just don't deliver on. The film made roughly $220 million worldwide on a $200 million budget, but that budget also doesn't take into account things like print and advertising, which, as a rule of thumb, they say is about the same size as your production budget. So they made roughly half of what they spent on the film. Now, could they have made 10 or more substantially smaller original films and spread that risk out over multiple projects that could have had modest successes and then made even more money back that way? No, of course not. That's silly. How dare you ask that? Don't think that way. One of the things I like to ask is why the film was made. Why they had to spend $220 million on a movie like this. And that's likely as a response to other successful films in the action-adventure genre that had come out in recent years. Films like Jumanji, Jumanji 2, Pirates of the Caribbean, the fifth one, I think, at that point in time. And in years before that, they'd had things like the Mummy series in the early 2000s, the Uncharted video games, which were huge, and Indiana Jones, the classic. However, they didn't really take into account the many flops which were happening around this time as well. Things like the 2017 Mummy reboot and the rest of the Dark Universe, which had failed, or the Uncharted films, which had been attempted to adapt for roughly a decade. But Disney had cash on the brain, and they really thought that this could be another Pirates franchise. So the film is adapted from an amusement park ride which had opened up in 1955, which was in turn adapted from an educational film series that Disney produced called True Life Adventure Films. And while the film does give one very early nod to the ride, from there it takes a very drastic turn towards the magical and mysterious in the same way that the Pirates films did. This is the first of many commonalities with the Pirates films, which was also coincidentally adapted from a theme park ride. It also borrowed the star of the moment, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, who had been coming off of a long string of successes. So from a business perspective, it really did have all of the right elements in place, and it looked like this would be a decent bet. But now we gotta talk about the story. Jungle Cruise is everything you've seen a million times before, only slightly worse. It feels like it was slapped together by a group of hyperactive toddlers who took all their favorite parts from better movies and smashed it together into one amalgam that ended up being kinda meh, which, side note, isn't too far from the way that Studio Notes actually works, but also, unfortunately, is the tragic future of the studio system as soon as they fully embrace AI. But that's a different story. Film checks all the boxes of the usual adventure-style serials. They got a magical curse, undead villains, over-the-top impossible action scenes that no human could possibly do, evil Nazi-adjacent third parties who are hell-bent on taking over the world, they got mostly unserious, quippy main characters who don't really seem to react to anything around them, and they've got a magical girl boss who's way too far ahead of her time.
Lily is ahead of her time.
And thus treated terribly by all the men in her life. It's also a movie that requires knowledge of all these other movies that have come before it to really pay off the nostalgia bait that they throw in, to give audiences that, oh yeah, I remember that from another movie moment that these movies seem to continuously rely on. And the film, while full of magic and wonder, ends up being a lifeless CGI fest. A hollow shadow of better films that came before it that thinks that just because they can copy these better movies, that it will also receive the same recognition, the same success. It's a film that shows exactly what studio executives think of the people who actually pay to see their films. And it shows how little they understand of what truly made their projects great in the first place. Over-the-top action, crappy, annoying, quippy characters whose nonchalance in every situation makes it hard to be begin to care about what's going on, combined with hyper-rushed, unrealistic CGI set pieces, do nothing but drag out the runtime. And to be fair to everyone involved in the project, I really do believe that the writer, the cast, the crew, and everyone who was involved in it really gave the best that they could with what they were given and within the constraints of the studio system. Now, before I go further, I want to clarify that I'm not one of those weirdos that dislikes strong female characters because they're women. What I am against, however, is lazy and bad writing, which unfortunately this film is full of. I don't like boring, forgettable clones of better characters who are inexplicably great at everything they do and capable of superhuman feats of strength and agility on the regular basis. All that plus the odd tonal inconsistencies combined with the CGI Buster Keaton-style slapstick action sequences make moments where we're supposed to feel any real tension lack realistic stakes. It makes it a really disappointing mess to a really cool premise. Now, moving on to more specifics. The story begins back in the 16th century when a group of conquistadors journey to the Amazon to bring back the Tears of the Moon, a tree whose petals are said to be able to cure any ailment or curse, and they're going to use it to save the one conquistador's daughter's life. But after they're saved by a bunch of natives, using the tears themselves, they respond by murdering everyone in that village and bringing a curse upon themselves, which will allow them to never leave the site of the river again. Cut to 400 years later, and we meet Dr. Lily Houghton, a resident badass lead, who's on a mission following in the footsteps of those conquistadors. But no one in the boys' club of that ancient adventure society believes her, so she steals the artifact that they have therein, which is necessary to find that tree. This is where we meet the main villain of the story, the son of Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany. She escapes his clutches to South America, where she hires a wisecracking riverboat captain named Frank to guide her to the tree. Together they journey through the Amazon, dodging Germans, hired thugs, undead conquistadors, the dangers of the jungle, and the river itself, to finally reach the tree and receive the Tears of the Moon. And in the only surprising revelation of the film, Frank turns out to have been one of those same cursed conquistadors himself, who was trapped there for 400 years, which I will say is a really good twist and wasn't something I saw coming. And then, to no one's surprise in the final act, everyone makes it to the tree and the final battle begins. Dr. Lily is only able to procure a single petal of that tree, and after a big action CGI set-piece battle, they defeat the Nazi precursors hell-bent on taking over the world and stop the immortal conquistadors trying to lift the curse, but at a great cost. Frank sacrifices himself by blocking off the river, the only thing that causes the jungle to encase the conquistadors, including himself, in a stone for all eternity. But 30 seconds later, Dr. Lily chooses to use the petal to free Frank from his curse, because she's in love with him now. But don't worry, all's well that ends well. Somehow they are magically rewarded with a second petal that just happened to be right in front of them the whole time. And so the day is saved. The Germans are dead, the conquistadors are trapped in stone for eternity. Frank is no longer cursed, and Dr. Lily is rewarded both with a tenure at Cambridge and the big hunk that is Frank. The end. Credits roll. That's it, everyone. Don't think about it too much further. Just go home. No. I'm sorry, you can't just leave it there. When the movie ended in theaters, my brain exploded with questions and queries about this world and what was going to happen after the credits rolled. Let's just think about this logically for 1 second. The world has changed forever. This single expedition not only discovered that magic and curses are real, they also discovered a new ancient ruin from a previously unknown civilization that had magical powers of some kind, and then they mysteriously disappeared. And on top of that, they also found a magical tree that has the power to cure any ailment, with seemingly no limits. So what the heck? That goes beyond just a funny little quip at the end of the movie. That's world-changing stuff in a universe that's still in the midst of World War I. I mean, the entire film is designed around finding this one plant. And we've heard from every one of the characters that the effects of this plant are enough to change the course of history, especially if it ends up in the wrong hands. The German prince wants it because he wants to use it to change the direction of World War I, and he wants to be able to use it to become immortal so he can rule that new empire by himself forever. And the conquistadors want it because they're trying to remove the curse. They already know that it saves them from death. So at the end of the film, when they get this petal, we're just supposed to forget about it? That's crazy. But you see in other movies where they do this, when they tease this incredibly powerful, world-altering magical item that humanity would greatly benefit from, the heroes don't end up with it at the end. They're either locked away forever, or they fall into some bottomless pit or buried under the sand, etc. Almost as if God or gods or fate or the universe itself says that this power should not be in the hands of humans. It's like, nah dog, humans ain't ready for that. But in this movie we get nothing like that. They get to just walk out of the temple holding a replenishable cure for death itself, as if it was nothing. And not only that, but they also have knowledge of where this is and how to get more of it. We're shown that it only really needs to have this moon at this point in time because they've already done all the stuff to unearth the temple. So what's stopping them from coming back and getting 1,000,000 times more of it? It doesn't have any other stipulations that we saw in the film. So like, where do you go from there? They clearly didn't withhold any of this information, as evidenced by the fact that they have Lily's brother going to the Adventure Society and basically telling them everything that had happened there. Wouldn't that be enough to cause chaos everywhere else? There's clearly enough evidence at that point then for this society and for everyone else to understand that this thing exists in the first place. So then what? And what happened to the petal itself? Is Emily Blunt controlling this petal? Is she trying to create a cure for everything herself? Is she turning it over to the state or some private actor? What's happening with it? I probably guess that the latter is true and that some government organization has the petal so they can do research onto it, but that also means that the private sector is going to get hold of it too. So what do you think they're going to do with it? Do you think they're going to take this magical cure for everything and give it to cancer patients, scientists, mathematicians, doctors, veterans, and normal everyday people? No, of course not. Not a snowball's chance in hell. What they're going to do is give it to the royalty. They're going to give it to rich men, to weapons manufacturers, to politicians, to military leaders, and maybe allied leaders from other countries who are willing to pay for it. And then you have to wonder, where do they go from there? What do they do with that information? And then you got to think about the people's response to all this. The knowledge that somewhere in South America, there exists a cure for any ailment. That basically no one ever has to die again so long as they have access to this thing. Dude, people were chugging horse dewormer in 2020 and trying to inject ultraviolet light and bleach into their veins. Do you think that there wouldn't be some massive movement to go to South America and get this themselves? And even more terrifying, what do you think the British Empire's response is to this? I mean, do you really think that the British Empire is going to just sit back and let the cure for death go unexploited in the Amazon? Do you think they would just let other nations go get there first? No, they're going to try and control that place and get there as quickly as possible. They would drop everything to colonize the Amazon to find that thing. And then you have to think about how other countries are thinking about this. Do you think they're just going to sit back and let the British Empire control this magical tree that cures death? A global conflict is going to emerge in South America from trying to control this one small area. We've done so much worse for so much less in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Saudi Arabia and Yemen and all these places. And I know a lot of people are thinking this is nitpicky, boring, stupid stuff, and that writers don't really have to answer every single question. But while that is true, it's also important for writers to have answers to these things, to understand how this would affect their worlds, because that reflects in the rest of their work and the rest of the movie. Because even if you don't answer all the questions directly, there should be enough information within the film itself to give you context clues as to what will happen afterwards. And I guess that's really the thing that bothers me about this. It's how little studio executives think about these story elements that they're pitching to these writers. I can't blame the writers entirely for this, because if you don't know, the writer doesn't get the final say. Of course, they're paid to do a draft and they're paid to implement their own voice into these projects, but the final say ends up in the studio's hands. They're the ones who are controlling the money. They then have to work to implement notes that studios give to them. If they don't implement it in a way that the studio finds satisfactory, they're gonna get fired and the studio's gonna bring in someone else. Every time a writer is writing on one of these projects, they're fighting for their livelihood and the ability to do more work for them in the future. They have to balance their own artistic integrity with the ability to support themselves in future projects. Because let's face it, a lot of the people in the positions of influence and power on these things don't know their ass from their elbow in terms of storytelling. So many of their biggest accomplishments and reasons for being in these positions of power in the first place is because they're cousins with Steven Spielberg's son-in-law or something like that. And these people love seeing their fingerprints on these projects, even if they make the project worse for it. They love being able to point to their friends and say, hey, you know that thing in River Cruise where there's that tree that gives people everlasting life? That was mine. That and not being blamed for box office failures that inevitably happen. But back to the story, I just wish that we lived in a world where the final product really thought about these things. That there were consequences or thoughts that were put into what happens after the credits roll. And it feels so lazy and just cheapens everything you've gone through when that doesn't happen. Everyone's just trying to one-up each other with their stakes and their giant set pieces because they think that's what's going to bring people back to the theaters, back to the pre-COVID days. But they don't think about the reality of the world that they're creating, or what happens when their characters get the final world-changing prize that they're seeking. And it shows me that the person writing or giving notes on these things isn't paying attention. They didn't think about these things and they didn't really believe the world that they were making. And more than that, it just feels so disrespectful to the audience. It's like they feel like, yeah, you'll watch this slop and you'll enjoy it, you pleb. To them, the internal logic and consistency of the thing that you're watching doesn't matter because you're too stupid to see it and they don't care enough to make it better. But that's just not true. Audiences are so much smarter than studio executives give them credit for. They can feel things even if they're not able to fully articulate what it is that they're feeling that's wrong with something. And we should always be striving to make the products and the movies and stories that we're telling better so that people can enjoy them more. And that's ultimately why I'm making this series, because I want to make my stories better. And I think that everyone can learn from the mistakes that other movies and stories have made. That, and I'm a little autistic. Anywho, That's all I really have to say about The Jungle Cruise for now. I hear that they're making a second one with the same cast, and it was supposed to be coming out sometime in 2025, but there hasn't really been updates on that in a couple of years. Regardless, I highly doubt that they would address any of these concerns because they don't really care about that. They're more looking to find the next big thing that they can put into theaters so that they can put more butts there. They're going to try and find some new Amazonian mystery that they can exploit and completely ignore everything else that came before it. Probably something like, the Aztecs, the end of the Mayan calendar and how that was supposed to signal the end of the world. And it's usually some world-ending thing and whatever. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. If you liked what you saw, please consider liking and subscribing. There are more things like this to come. Thanks so much. Frank was the only person who knew that the conquistadors were trapped. How the hell did the Kaiser's son know exactly where to find them? How did Frank, a 400-year-old conquistador from Spain, end up with an American accent when he was living in Brazil? Why did they think that The Rock would make a good romantic lead? He's just not that type of actor. I think they make great friends, and I think that's a really cool relationship that they have, but as friends, not as romantic partners. It just doesn't make sense. Why the hell would this doctor give up the cure for death for a guy that's been negging her for a month?